Thanks for sticking around. I think you'll enjoy this panel. These guys really like talking about Tron. They've gone out. Some of them have had a couple of drinks. Bruce Logan isn't here, but we've got someone who's going to play Bruce Logan, and they're going to tell stories out of turn. Ladies and gentlemen, writer-director Steven Lisberger, Richard Taylor, John Shealy, Harrison Miller-Shaw. Bill, stand up for a second. If you've ever wondered who had the honor of having the first picture in Cinefex with someone sitting on a monitor, at a computer monitor, it was Bill Croyer on this one. So, why don't we start out real briefly and sort of place this film in context and tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and what you were doing before Tron and sort of what led up to Tron. Steven, you want to lead off?
Yeah, my background was primarily in animation. I went to film school, but I really got into animation more than live action. And I saw computer animation for the first time at MIT in Boston. And I knew that we had to create a character if we were going to survive as a studio. So I thought, well, we'll go with something in the computer realm, because that seems to be what's happening. And a very talented animator that worked at the studio named John Norton, he worked up an electronic warrior called Tron. And it's interesting because everything that came after that sort of grew out of an animation background. And it became more live action as it moved forward. But in a way, the whole industry has sort of moved in that direction over the years too. It really was animation that figured out how to composite an enormous amount of shots. And when we started on Tron, if you talked in numbers of 50 or 200 effect shots, people, ran for the door. And then I thought, well, we're going to do this. It's going to need 1,100 effect shots and 900 with composited human beings. And the only way you could do it, really, is to break it all down like an animated film so it wouldn't bottleneck behind optical printers. Really, the big breakthrough wasn't just CG. The breakthrough, and this happened after Tron, years later, was digital compositing of film. And when we made Tron, that concept was almost more than you could ever hope for. So that was my background. And I really, I was inspired by the people who worked with computers. That's where the story came from. And it was their dedication to something that didn't exist yet that I thought really was, it was like artists, only they were technicians. And what really kept me going was trying to put all these big themes that were in my head together with the technology. And it wasn't just the effects, it really was that story stuff. And just like we put together all these elements to make the film, I never worked with computers, even when I was making Tron. I just worked with the people who had to work with the computers. And it was always about the people. It was fight for the users, and right from the beginning. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up about this, was that I realized that people back in the day that were so scared of technology, I've thought about that over the years. Why were they so scared of it? And then, it's only recently I've come to the conclusion they were scared of it because it was in our hands, not in theirs. If they had had the technology, I think then it would have been fine. But when they looked at that group of filmmakers and said, these guys have all these tools, what's happening to the world? So it's interesting the way the future shows up, and it doesn't come from the people you think are going to deliver it, and it doesn't look like what they expected it to look like. and that's what throws people off. So.
Richard, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I'm Richard Taylor. I was co-effects director on the film with Harrison here. I got involved in Tron. I had been at Robert Abel and Associates, as an art director, designer there, and had created a process called Candy Apple Neon, which was a way of backlighting artwork, and we did a lot of ABC and on-air graphics and the 7-Up on Cola commercials back in the day. And I had worked on Star Trek. What's that?
The 70s.
The 70s, yeah. 70s rock. So I had moved on. I worked on Star Trek the feature, and then I had joined up with Magi Synthovision. Triple I, Information International Incorporated, and became creative director there, and was heavily involved in the first evolutions of raster graphics. Raster graphics is when the computer imitates the effect of light hitting an object and bounces it to a theoretical camera and creates a dimensional object. And that was what we used in Tron to replace what would have been done with miniatures. And so I was there, and we had done a film called Looker, which we did the effects for. And then Steven Lisberger luckily came researching his film Tron, and we all eventually ended up together working on the film, and the rest is history.
Wow. It's pretty amazing that Tron was so long ago, and it still warms my heart to be up here with these people, because as Steven said, it is about the people. And as much as Tron gets noticed because it was all about computers, that was never the issue. That was never part of it. I was very fortunate that I'd been in the film business doing matte paintings basically up until Tron. And Tron was my first time as a co-visual effects supervisor. And in those days, there weren't that many people supervising visual effects, because visual effects, there just wasn't the kind of numbers of effects in films that there are. Every film today has effects in it, what we call effects. So my first gig as a visual effects supervisor was to work on a film that had 1,200 visual effects in it. And I had no idea. I don't think many of us did. Thankfully, Steven had this harebrained concept of it would be done with computers, and then it would be done with backlight compositing and all sorts of stuff, which I kind of knew about, but not much. So it was such a learning experience, and it was such a huge challenge just to figure out how to get through the day and into the next day and get this film out into the theaters in basically a year and a half. And we weren't reinventing the wheel, we were inventing a whole new thing that wasn't like old wheels. It was just a new genre, basically. And it in a sense, gives me chills now to know that I was fortunate enough, so long ago, to be part of it.
And it's not just the technology, that was involved in the, shooting of the backlight animation. It's also the data management. It's essentially the organization, and it's the coordination to make sure none of that stuff gets lost, because you'll see in a little bit exactly what went into doing most of this stuff.
We were really fast. We finished.
Yeah, a year and a half.
I locked up the picture after principal photography, 3 weeks after principal photography. This movie was finish, edit, done. Don't change it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That was 3 weeks after principal, and we basically did these 1,100 shots in 7 months with a system that had never been done. And on Tron Legacy just now, we had more than double the time, and we barely got it done.
So, continuing the introductions, Bill, you were at Disney as an animator at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, I started at Disney in 1977 in the animation department, and it was, it was the traditional Disney 2D animation department. I sometimes tell the story that when I came into that department, the only technology in my workspace that was not there during Snow White was the electric pencil sharpener. And I'm not kidding. The pegs, the scene stackers, the way we sent film down the camera, came back in 35mm loops, for the new moviolas. They did have electric pencil sharpeners. They still had the old hand crank pencil sharpeners screwed onto the desk. So, it was amazing how in 40 years, absolutely nothing had changed. The Snow White animator could have walked into my room and sat right down and gone to work. So a couple years later, we were doing Fox and the Hound. It wasn't that exciting. Steve Lisberger comes to town from Boston, comes over to the studio, visits, comes into our room and pitches all this about, I'm in town, I got this new studio, it's going to be really exciting. You guys should all, quit Disney and come work for me. And of all the guys, and there were so many stellar guys, in that room was Brad Bird, who directed Ratatouille, and John Musgrave, who directed, Princess and the Frog, and Henry Selick, who directed Coraline, and Tim Burton was it, and the only person who quit Disney and went to work for Steven Lisberger was me.
But Brad Bird came later.
When he got fired.
So Bill, have you ever had to pay for dinner?
No, here's the cool thing though. It's like, so we go down to the dentist, and we're making Animal Olympics, which, by the way, I think this is just directed. Yeah, it's a really great little film, and I think it's the last. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the last animated feature film, hand inked, hand painted, completely done under one roof in the United States of America. The whole thing was done in our warehouse in Venice. We boarded it, animated it, in between it, hand inked it, painted it, shot it. So while we're doing this film with this great little crew of people, I used to have some of my friends from the animation business come down to do, on Friday nights after work. We kind of have people, very famous animators, Ken O'Connor, the greatest layout guy in Disney history. So one Friday, I invited Walt Paraguay, and you'll know him. He's the guy who designed 101 Dalmatians. You're all familiar with that incredible look, with the Xerox line and the kind of wash color and everything. Just one of the great art directors of all time. We invited him to come down and talk to the crew. And usually when we'd have animators or painters or layout people, they'd bring stuff, they'd bring art, and they'd show stuff. Well, Paraguay walks in with nothing. And we all get into the conference room, we sit down. And I'm wondering, what's he going to show us? And he gets up and he says, you guys, too bad you missed it. And so what are you talking about? He says, the golden age is over. Everything good has been done. You guys, you're doing junk too, you're never going to do anything good again. That gets over. And I'll never forget this. Steve goes into this thing.
I forgot, but go ahead.
I'll tell the story. Steve goes in this thing and he says to Walt Paraguay, he says, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to put stuff on the screen that you can't even imagine. We're going to create imagery that you can't even dream of today. And I have to say, didn't he do it?
Yeah. That is, I did want mentoring, but back then you really couldn't find it. And when we got to Disney, this is a short one, and we'll go to you, John. And we got to Disney, and we had we developed Tron completely on our own. And basically with the boycott of the 1980 Olympics, I lost my studio. So I needed a place to go to make Tron, and that was a real torturous road getting that thing going. But we got to Disney and things were going, and we had the whole movie on story reels. All the storyboards were shot so you could look at the movie. And I wanted to show it to one of the old Disney 9 old men to see what they thought of the movie. And I won't give the name of which one it was, but one of the 9 old men sat in the screening room with me, and I thought, this is going to be good. I'm really going to get what I need here. And when it was over, the lights went on, he got up, he started walking out, he said, you're on your own, kid.
I'm Sheely. I was the technical effects supervisor, and I came out of a background in motion control and graphics, which Richard and I shared a background in printmaking and photography and graphics. I think the area that strikes me is that we ended up with the challenge right away, and also not having any way of doing the human figure. You know, that Richard was pushing then and did some great work in III with a juggler. It was a big eyeball that looked really cool, an eyeball that might blink. It was so ahead of in the future. We all, like everyone, thought it was maybe 6 months or 5 years. It's like the Iraq War is going to end in that long a time. There would be a digital character. So one of the first challenges, along with being able to create the look of the environments, was that the human figure had to be added in. And Steve had already come up with, and Harrison had done a test, an optical test, hybrid optical printing technique of putting photographic images together. And just like every movie that gets done now, Tron was a Frankenstein collection of everything that worked thrown together to make it move and make it work. And I would say, as an early introduction, you probably maybe already seen this. Harrison and I both brought some cells, but this ends up being the human figures, you might know. It's all 65 photography, black and white, blown up onto frames. Share one of the codaliths. This is a real codalith. That's so you can see the look of it. Here's a translucent codalith. Beautiful stuff. You can take a look after the show if anyone wants.
So every frame of the film in the electronic world was blown up like that. So it filled like 2 tractor-trailer trucks. And
It all went to Taiwan and then came back.
yeah, to get junk painted and stuff, but junk masks. But the thing that was interesting about that process, besides the fact that it worked, is that we had underestimated budget-wise. We didn't hear it. But we used to have these panic sessions where shut the door, and then we realized the scope of what we were attempting, because every one of those frames had to be rephotographed on an animation stand and had to be exposed for every separate color. So the whites of the eyes, the flesh of the skin, the different costumes. So each frame of the electronic world had to be exposed about 15 times, sometimes 30 times. And it was pretty gargantuan undertaking, but it was a system, and it worked. And when we finally sat down with Disney, and I thought they were really going to freak out, and when we find out that we've underestimated the work required, they did freak out, but they got it. It was like an animated movie.
They were familiar with doing that kind of work.
Yeah, any other studio, I don't know what would have happened. But at Disney, they went, well, okay, you have 500,000 of these and 600,000 of these, and we'll just shoot them, And so I give a lot of credit to Disney for, understanding what we were trying to do.
And another little odd note is those codaliths were never made like regular film stock. The codalith is made for graphics, so every time there would be a batch change, every few hundred frames, there would be an exposure pop. And Steve would look at these. I remember you saying in the data, it's like, well, it's just the way it is in the electronic world. When you have exposure pop, you could have just over the exposure pop.
That we figured out how to solve that problem when we realized that we had to work with the batches as Kodak made them, but that's too technical.
And just to put this a little bit into context, the electronic world, when they're all inside the computer, is about 53 minutes worth of the movie. And if you start doing some math, 53 minutes times 60 seconds, in a minute, times 24 frames per second, you wind up with 75,000 frames. Times, hour 4 or 5, 15, all of that stuff. You wind up with a stack of cells that, if you stack them 5 feet high, would run from the screen all the way into the store next door.
It was a lot of stuff.
So it actually takes up a physical volume, and all that stuff has to be moved, and it all has to be.
It was all handwork. It wasn't computer. It was amazing computer work that Richard will talk about.
It was digital.
But it was digital.
The thing was that the film was really handmade, other than the computer simulation part, and a lot of that was handmade in a way. But literally, we shot 65 millimeter, and we photoroded to make these big cells. and they were inked and painted. All of it was sent to Taiwan to do the inking and painting and come back, and it was, 10, 15, 20 exposures per frame. We had 18 backlit animation cameras. We had 8 scene coordinators. Each one of them was responsible for X number of scenes in the film. They all had to write these massive exposure sheets, keep track of all these elements. The logistics were, nobody will ever do that again. But people thought that the computer had stylized that imagery in the electronic world, and it was really hand done.
Yeah, as Steve will tell you, on the Tron Legacy, when you look at if you ever see any of the takes from the effect shots, in the bottom you see the slate with the take number. And those takes would go up to like 122 takes on an effect shot. And on our movie, if they got one take that basically worked, Richard would say, that's okay. Yeah, and if there were little things popping or going on and off, like cameras, that's how the computer rolled.
Yeah, we were going so fast, and we had 15 minutes of solid computer-generated animation in the film that went with the other. It was more like 60 minutes and 15 minutes, and one frame of the atmospheric explosion in the light cycle sequence of Tron Legacy has more computing power in that one frame than in this whole movie.
I think my phone has more computing Steven, let's talk a little bit about the story, because that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Give us some background into the inspirations and the commentary that you were trying to make.
Well, it was a different time back then. Things really go through cycles, and it was a time that we felt empowered if we could work in the realm of the unknown. Today, people feel empowered if they can work in real time in an interactive way. It was ridiculous how uninteractive this technology was back then. I saw the first finished frame, one frame of the film when the movie was half done. And up until that point, I had never seen what Tron was going to look like, but I was shooting it and making it and just pretending I did know what it was going to look like. So, it was an era when, I'll use the word founding, but we were founding a technology. And I don't know, I was really confident because I felt the story was solid because I spent so many years working on it and interviewing the people that were behind this. And there was something about being the first one there. It inspired me tremendously. And then when I had the right team around me, I thought, what could be better than this? You have this new technology, you have enough money, and it's going to be this great group of artists and film technicians that are so talented, and we're going to get there first, and that was just really exhilarating. And it's a different time today. It's people talk about originality. This is a more reactive time when people are trying to make things more, how do I put it, more practical for wider applications, to make things real. You build a Wright Brothers plane, and then later on you build a jetliner that carries people around the world. That's the time we're in now, where we're making things for everyone compared to making these leaps of faith that we made back then. And I think that's okay. I think that's part of the cycle. But it was really exciting to be first. In terms of the story, it was inspired partially by Spartacus. I like that movie. I'm a 60s person, and the idea of a revolution was in the air. We felt that the technology, computers, were only in the hands of IBM, and one day, if we naively believed that the world would be perfect if we could just get those tools and get them in our hands. If we all had a computer, nothing could stop us. And that was that was in the air. That was something that motivated us, the belief in that. And of course, you know, that turned out to be true, because the world's perfect now.
So, Richard and Harrison, talk a little bit about the challenges of shooting all this, because it's almost as if there were two films. There was this live-action film that had to be shot, you know, conventionally, even though it was unconventional, but with a film in a camera, and then there was the animated process afterwards.
The challenge was to try to pay attention to the details, but keep the overall picture. Excuse the pun, but when a director, and who also happens to be the writer, makes this commitment, it's up to you to fulfill the vision. The very fortunate part for Richard and I was that we had seen this vision articulated very, very well. There were three very key designers, Sid Mead, Mobius, and Peter Lloyd. Thank you. And they distilled the vision into this amazing design. And to be able to be part of that and to find that challenge, yet at the same time worry about what exposure should be on what cell and what of the 76,000 frames is just a huge number to manage, just to keep them in order, to have people who can figure out how to number each one, and you can't overstate how important the details were, but at the same time, you got to make the whole film look like it's one person. And so you have 400 people working on the visual effects on this film and on production, and all 400 have to be literally on the same page. You can't say, oh, look, I can tell that shot is put together by the person who did the 3 shots before it. No, it has to have a consistency to it and also reflect what the story is.
Let me address some of the computer simulation stuff, because at the time we made Tron, there were no PCs, there were no Macs, there was no internet.
Actually, hang on a second. How many people here were born after 1982?
No cell phones. Right, so there were no cell phones. The computer simulation companies that worked on the film, Magi Synthavision from New York and III, were the two main companies, and then Robert Abel Associates did the real world, the electronic world transition. But each one of those companies had their own software and their own hardware. Each computer simulation company was like a hot rod. They had their own engine, they had their own, own way of driving the thing. So it was our job to make the imagery from one match the other. So we did stylizations of the objects to make them look similar. But one of the most difficult things was that the people who were the technicians in these places were not artists per se. They were technical people who were writing in Fortran, and there wasn't even C at that time. Remember, there was no Maya, no Max, no Lightwave, no Nuke, no After Effects, no Photoshop.
They would take Polaroids of what's on the monitor and mail them to me. Open the envelope and look at the Polaroid, and then I get them on the phone. Okay, let's talk about it.
So III was here in LA and Magi was in New York. And what we had to come up with, which Bill Croyer and Jerry Reese did such a brilliant job of, was to take, first of all, we wanted to do with computer simulations the things that it could do that traditional types of photography couldn't. There are no physical limits to the camera, and there are no physical limits to the objects. So we could do camera moves that nobody had ever seen before. But to come up with those and to come up with a way of diagramming those objects from the storyboards and coming up with a language to communicate to the technical people was something that Jerry and Bill did a phenomenal job of, and I'd like Bill to address that, actually.
Well, yeah, there was no animation software, and you couldn't see anything move on a computer screen, because there was no, what they then called the graphics pipeline, that a lot of things actually moved. So nothing could move on a computer screen. And essentially what you had to do on Tron was you had to basically render every object every frame. You know, okay, so I have 24 frames, I'll render it here in frame 1, here in frame 2. So what you're really doing, and it's so basic, you know, is you literally write down the X, Y, Z coordinates and the yaw, pitch, and roll, like the light cycles, right? You just say, okay, in frame 1, it's here on X and Y and Z and yaw, pitch, roll. And you write down literally on an exposure sheet, like an animation exposure sheet, on frame 1, exactly where you wanted it rendered at that point and how you wanted it angled. And then you'd write down where you wanted it rendered and angled on frame 2 and then frame 3. As you can imagine, that's a lot. I can't remember how many, 80,000 frames or some ridiculous amount. And the other problem is, think about it, you know, if you want them to move with curves and everything, think how tough that is to figure out the curves. So Jerry and I were doing this for like the first couple of weeks. And then, you know, there was one computer in the Disney lab. There was one computer. You know where it was? It was on the Oxberry camera. And the Oxberry was the big camera, right, that shot down and downshooted. And they had these little dials that you would dial, going hand left to right, going to dial. There's a guy named Bill Tondreau who invented, he said, I can do this with a computer. So he came up with a computer that they attached to these dials, and it just worked with simple B-splines, right? All you would do is you type a number in, and you would hit a button, and it would do a B-spline calculation, which was just an easy and ease-out curve, right? But I looked at that and I thought, wait, that's basically what we're doing. So I thought, why don't I just figure out the keyframes of my light cycles? I'll just figure out the keys, and then I'll go down to the Oxberry when the guy's not shooting. I'll sit down there at the computer and I'll type in my keys, frame 1, frame 17, frame 47, and I'll hit that button and whoop, up come 47 lines of numbers, right? But there's no way to print them. So I literally would sit there and I had to write them all out, which I did. And then if that isn't even worse, then I'd mail them to the computer companies, and then some more schmuck at that end would sit there and he would type them all in, and that's how.
Then they would call me, just me, and say, we can't do this like this over the weekend. And then I'd have to, you know.
You got another idea?
But, you know, yeah. The thing is, you know, as a director and also as a producer, what you really want to do is you want to find people that are basically, how do I say this, they're better at what they do than you tried to do what they did. And that was great. You know, it's when I had worked with Bill on Animal Olympics, I'm a great believer in, you know, relationships from film to film if you can make it happen. And when I saw Bill and Jerry get into the light cycles, you know, we started talking about it, and I went back and then I thought, man, these guys are really into this, you know. And nothing could make me feel better than that. And, you know, if you want to know why the light cycles are so incredible in terms of the animation and all of that, it's because of this guy right here. So I'd just like to, you know, put a pin in that concept that the director is going to do every single part of the film and be into it. That's a bad sign. You know? It's like if he can feel confident that someone is better at that than he will ever be and can walk away and get into some other area where they needs his help, that's what you want to see happen. And that's the way you want to think about it as a director.
So, Bill, with the animation, when did you sort of, obviously it was a lot of, you know, digital in-betweening, you know, writing down all the numbers. When, in the process of CG, did it sort of click in that it was a little bit more user-friendly and it was a little bit more, you know, you could apply more art to it as opposed to math?
Well, I don't know if it ever really, that ever quite happened. I mean, if you look at the story, if you ever get a chance to see the storyboards we did, they are dead on to the film, because, you know, you couldn't like work your way through these scenes. There was no interactivity. You know, you had to literally define them exactly the way you wanted them, and that was it. You know, nowadays, I have this experience with a lot of my young animators who work in computer graphics. In the old days when we were drawing, it was so hard to draw a scene that you didn't start drawing the scene until you knew what the scene was. You thumbnailed little sketches and you really worked it out. You really figured out the poses and everything, because it was just so much work to draw 50 drawings.
Yes, it's too expensive. I went through this with Tron Legacy. You know, animation is additive. You start with nothing and you have to make everything. And live action tends to be subtractive. You just shoot everything you can and then you start whittling it down to find out what's best. And you know, these films are so intensive in terms of the work that has to go in every frame that you can't afford to throw anything away. So you better make sure you know down to the frame, literally, what's going to go through the final process before you do it.
And the result
Well-
really comes out better and different when you're forced to make decisions,
Yeah,
feasible decisions.
You know, the thing is, when I developed Tron originally down at Lisberger Studios in Venice, we designed all the characters, we storyboarded the whole movie, we wrote the whole script, we did everything, and then it kept improving. It kept going through all these phases, and again, that's what I mean about adding the right people. When Richard got involved, when we really went into production, I knew him during the early phases, and when he got involved, he was the expert on backlight and knew all the scene coordinators coming from Able. And it was really that army that came in and pulled all that together. And Harrison was the man who made, I think, working at Disney Studios possible. I mean, when Bill talks about, you know, how it was 40 years behind the time, it was like one of the Sleeping Beauty. I mean, it was like there were thorny vines growing over all the place. And, you know, people were looking at us like, who are these computer invaders? We have to kill them. And there was quite a bit of animosity.
We were playing rock and roll.
I asked for curtains in my office so I could look at the, you know, transparencies, and they said, "You can have curtains. You're not a vice president." And but you know, Harrison grew up in that studio, and he, you know, he made it work for us. It was, you know, and then it became fun. People told me, you know, quietly at night, they said, "I have to tell you a secret. It really feels like it used to feel when Walt was here." Because the mistaken belief was that Walt always knew exactly where they were going. And he said, we were all terrified. Every film was an experiment. We always reached past what we knew. And that's what it feels like now, working on Tron. So.
You know, I just have to say, watching the movie tonight in 70mm, I was struck by the simplicity and the beauty of the film. I mean, I think that there's the fact that it has, by necessity, it was simple because we couldn't do a lot of extra stuff. But I think that forces you into excellent decisions of light, color, composition. And people talk about, yes, we had Sid Mead, yes, we had Mobius, yes, we had Peter Little. But I always say, yes, we had Richard Taylor. I look at Richard Taylor as the essential designer in that film. And when you look at Richard's history, what he's done, and then you look at that film, Tron, boy, I tell you, there's a beauty to that stands up even to this day. I think it's just absolutely, like, really, there's nothing really happening like that today.
You know, I gotta say that those of us who came from the analog era, when you shot on animation stands, when you did opticals to see a composite scene that had to go through an optical printer, go to the lab, come back the next day, then you would look at the wedges on that, you'd have to rewrite and redo the mask, run it through an optical printer. It took days to see changes in a scene. And so everything about working in that era was planning well, storyboarding well, having a clear idea of where you were going to go and working that way. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works now. If computer simulation was supposed to make things faster, better, and cheaper, why do movies cost $200 million now? And it's because you can change. And they're creating now by change. Rather than clearly thinking out ideas and following the simplest path, it's change after change after change until the very 11th hour.
I want to have an opportunity for some of the audience members to ask some questions. So we don't have time for a lot, but you right here. Yeah, you.
like to address this one to Steven Lisberger. I'd like to hear a little bit more about some spiritual beliefs that influenced you when you were designing the story. I see those in the film, and I wanted to know what sort of beliefs you held at the time and how they influenced the story.
Yeah, I was very much into the spiritual components of the film. And someone came to a screening of the film at Roger Ebert's festival all the way from Germany, and he said to me, I just want to know, are those in there intentionally? I said, yes. He said, okay, now I'll go back to Germany. They really are. I think that I thought about it a lot. You know, it was a long time ago. I think that one of the core spiritual beliefs is embodied in the idea that the programs look up to us as gods. And if you it's easier to describe it if you think of kids looking up to their parents as gods. And there's something spiritual about that relationship because it forces the parent to try to live up to that. So something intangible, something sacred, you know, based on love and belief from the child is happening. And so, you know, to me, that was a sacred relationship. And I saw how we were at a crossroads now. We were going to try to create a doppelganger of this world. And here it was perfect. You know, we were starting at the beginning. And it could either bring out just the best, you know, all the best in us, or it could bring out the worst in us. And I became fascinated with that, you know, that concept of where if you're given a second chance with a second world, how good you're going to make it. And the imagery started to connect with all those themes, the mandala imagery of the discs, and also the fact that we were working all day long with light. You know, it was all about light. There's a story that in Russia, one of the munitions factories switched to making church bells, and all the cursing stopped after a while. So, you know, I did believe in the themes having to do with connecting with the highest version of yourself.
Thank you.
This question is also for Mr. Lisberger. In Legacy, when Garrett Hedlund uploads the new operating system version on the internet, I was curious if when you constructed the story, when you wrote the story back in the 80s, and Tron makes that comment, he's like, this could be a free system again. If that just... was that intended? I mean, that was before Bill Gates even came out with Windows, and it's almost like you just had the gift of foresight, or was that just like the most perfect way you
Yeah, I've wondered about some of the things. You know, it's called NCOM. There was no com back then. There was no .com. You know, so after a while, it starts to snowball. You're on some sort of inertia, and it feeds on itself. Yeah, it seemed, how do I put this, when there was nothing there really, if you thought about it, you could really see that it had to go in certain directions, that there was a sense of an inevitability, because you were just thinking of it in a foundation sense, whereas now it's so complex that you have to specialize. But when there was nothing, you know, it's when you're the first ones to cross the Rockies, you know, you're looking out at the wilderness of the West, and I think it's easier to imagine what is going to be required to get people to live in the West that hasn't been conquered than it is for people later once civilization has come in and brought all the baggage of the good and the bad and the bad and the good. So.
Thank you.
Guy in the Tron t-shirt with the Tron disc.
I have a double question. We were talking earlier about 1 gigabyte being too much. How much memory did you guys actually use on the special effects shots of this movie?
Each each computer company had their own hardware software. The III had a computer called the Foonly F1, which was a single pipeline computer at 256K and 1 megahertz.
That was considered the ultimate.
So as Steven said, all of the computer decisions made in Tron are infinitely less than just the particles in 1 frame of legacy.
Way there in the back.
My question is regarding, you guys, it's obvious that you guys spent a lot on the technology of making the film, but as far as the creative aspect, like how did you pick your shots? You were thinking in terms of animation, but were you thinking of creatively, or were you just satisfied with whatever you could get?
Well, you know, a lot of credit goes to the great Mobius for some of the shots of this film, the best ones. I mean, we had storyboarded the film down in Venice, and it was what more could you ask? You know, we presented the storyboard to Mobius, and he's a very spiritual man too, and he went over it, and I learned a lot from him. He was a major influence in, you know, working that stuff out. But as we talked about it, it wasn't on the day. You know, we had really, by the time we were making some of these shots, they had been filtered down through, you know, over a year of, you know, what really is going to be the moment when the disc, you know, is connected to the user. And I found that was the best way to work with these mega talented people like Sid and Mobius, is to, strangely, not to give them total freedom with a blank slate. Because the problem with guys like Sid is he doesn't make any changes. Sid does your light cycle, and if you don't like it, that's tough. you don't say to Sid, hey, I work the fender, you know. So you better work it all out and say, this is as far as we got, Sid. And, you know, now you take it, but you've already created some parameters. But let me say one more thing about the spiritual thing quickly, which just came back to me, which is what's really happened now is we've divided the world in two through this process. It's, you know, there's 2 realities. And I don't think any of us anticipated that the 2 realities were going to pull on us with such equal strength. And I think it's created a desire to put the 2 worlds back together. But that was already, you know, the disc and the notion of communicating between the programs and the users was already something that I felt that if you divide the world up for human beings, you have to have some hope of making it whole again, because that's, you know, we need wholeness.
Hi.
Last question.
I would like to speak with Steven Lisberger and Harry Allenstone. When did you guys start working on Tron? Was that back in 1979, 1980?
It was probably the first ideas for Tron probably go back to Boston and around 78, 77, somewhere back there.
I started on the movie in 1980, late 80, I got involved.
All right, and I'm still working on it.
One last comment. You know, we did a show of hands here. There's a lot of people here who never saw the film when it first came out. Was there
They probably were born.
I know. How many people here who saw this on the screen for the first time tonight?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
There's a Blu-ray DVD that'll be out in April.
You know, we did this 5 years ago. Sold out then. We've done it at the Academy. It's sold out. They're doing it at the DGA next week, and it'll probably sell out. And now there's an animated series
as well. He's getting to Chicago. That's a pretty good legacy. And with that, I'll say end of line and thank you all for coming.